The roar of motorcycles shattered the quiet street as the gang skidded to a stop in front of John Marshall's home. Daryl, their leader, ripped the American flag from John's porch and tossed it to the ground. "Pack it up, old man," he sneered. "This isn't your place anymore." John knelt, picking up the flag with steady hands, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing beneath. The gang laughed, unaware of the man they were provoking, a man with the power and connections to turn their arrogance into their downfall. What happened next would leave the entire neighborhood speechless. But let's start from the beginning. John Marshall, a middle-aged widower, was a quiet man known in his Denver suburb for his well-maintained lawn and ever-present American flag proudly displayed on his porch. His neighbors saw him as a man of routine, someone who spent his days tending to his garden, enjoying the little things in life. Beneath this seemingly unremarkable exterior, however, lay a secret. John was the head of a federal counter-terrorism agency, a man whose decisions shaped national security. The evening started like any other, with John quietly sipping tea on his porch. The serenity of the neighborhood was shattered by the thunderous roar of motorcycle engines. A group of bikers, 8 in total, rode into the cul-de-sac. Their leather jackets bore the emblem of a flaming wolf, and their loud, careless laughter echoed down the quiet street. The neighbors peeked through their blinds, their faces pale with apprehension. Among them was Mrs. Whitaker, who whispered to her husband, "They're up to no good. I can feel it." The bikers dismounted, their leader, a burly man named Daryl, with a jagged scar running down his cheek, taking charge. He scanned the area with a smirk before his gaze landed on John's modest home. "This place is too clean," Daryl sneered, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. "Looks like a postcard. Let's fix that." The group broke into laughter, egging each other on as they began tossing fast food wrappers and empty cans onto John's lawn. One of them pulled out a key and ran it along the side of John's mailbox, leaving deep, jagged scratches. John heard the commotion and stepped out onto his porch, his expression calm but firm. "Evening, gentlemen. Is there something I can help you with?" Daryl turned, eyeing John with disdain. "Help? Sure, old man. Help us understand why someone like you lives here. This ain't your crowd." The group howled with laughter, emboldened by their leader's bravado. John, unfazed, glanced at the trash on his lawn and raised an eyebrow. "I see you've made yourself at home. Should I fetch you a broom? Or is this a performance piece?" Daryl's smile disappeared. He strode toward John's porch, yanking the flagpole from its mount. With a dramatic flourish, he tossed the flag onto the ground. "This junk? You think this means anything?" For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. The neighbors gasped audibly from their windows, their faces a mixture of fear and disbelief. John's eyes flicked toward the discarded flag, and a muscle in his jaw tightened ever so slightly. Without a word, he descended the steps, picked up the flag, and carefully shook off the dirt. His movements were deliberate, calm, eerily so. He gave Daryl a steady look before retreating into the house. "Run along, Grandpa!" Daryl shouted, laughing as he motioned for his crew to follow him back to their bikes. "We're just getting started." Inside, John folded the flag neatly, his fingers brushing over its fabric, as if handling something sacred. A faint smile crept across his face, not one of amusement, but of anticipation. He walked to his study, where a sleek laptop sat waiting. As he booted it up, he murmured to himself, "They have no idea who they're dealing with." The chapter ended with the low hum of John's computer coming to life, a quiet promise of what was to come. The next morning, John stepped outside with his cup of coffee, only to find chaos waiting for him. His meticulously cared-for garden, a source of quiet pride, was in ruins. The once perfect hedges were slashed and torn, flower beds stomped into muddy patches. Worse still, the facade of his home was defaced with crude graffiti, mismatched letters, cartoonish symbols, and phrases like, "Outta here, old man," sprayed in neon colors. John sipped his coffee, seemingly unbothered. He tilted his head, studying the graffiti like a critic examining modern art. "Well, it's bold," he muttered to himself. "Terrible grammar, though." Mrs. Whitaker, peeking nervously through her blinds, gasped. "John, are you just going to stand there? Do something." "Don't worry, Carol," John called back with a polite wave. "I'm handling it." By evening, the bikers returned, this time revving their engines louder than ever. Their leather jackets gleamed under the dim streetlights as they dismounted, carrying a large red gas can. Daryl, their leader, swaggered up to the front yard, his gang following close behind. "This place is too boring," one of the bikers hollered. "Let's give it some personality." Daryl raised the gas can dramatically, sloshing its contents onto John's front porch. John opened the door just as Daryl struck a match. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "this is hardly the neighborly way to say hello." "Oh, it's more of a goodbye," Daryl sneered, tossing the match onto the gasoline-soaked wood. Flames roared to life, licking hungrily at the porch railing. John's face remained composed, though his eyes flicked to the fire as it spread. He calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "If you're going to burn down my porch, Daryl, at least smile for the camera." Daryl froze for a split second before noticing the small black cameras mounted discreetly on the corners of John's house. "You think you're smart, huh?" John tilted his head. "Well, smarter than someone who commits arson on a federal officer's property, yes." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, but Daryl doubled down. "You think some fancy cameras scare me?" he barked. "This is just the beginning, old man. Sell the house, or next time, it won't be just the porch." The fire department arrived moments later, their sirens cutting through the night. The firefighters quickly extinguished the blaze, leaving behind a charred but salvageable porch. As the bikers sped off, John stood in his driveway, watching them go. His expression was unreadable, save for the faintest curl of a smile at the corner of his lips. Inside, John replayed the footage on his computer, pausing on Daryl's sneering face. "Careful what you wish for, Daryl," he said to himself. "You might just get it." The following day, the bikers returned to their usual stomping grounds, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. They laughed and boasted about their antics, with Daryl regaling the group about how he put the fear of fire into the old man. "What's he gonna do?" one of them joked. "Call the cops. They won't get here before we're long gone." Unbeknownst to them, John's quiet demeanor belied years of experience in planning and executing counter-terror operations. While the bikers celebrated, John was working in his study. He wasn't just replaying the footage, he was sharing it with the local authorities and his federal colleagues. By nightfall, John's plan was in motion. As the bikers lounged around their makeshift hideout, headlights pierced through the darkness. Black SUVs pulled up in front of the warehouse, their engines idling with an ominous growl. The gang scrambled to their feet, their bravado giving way to confusion. "What's this?" Daryl barked, stepping forward. The SUV doors opened in unison, and several men in tactical gear stepped out. At the head of the group was John, dressed sharply in a jacket and tie, looking every bit the authoritative figure. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "I believe you owe me a new porch." Daryl's jaw dropped. "You? What is this?" "This," John said, gesturing to the team behind him, "is the consequence of bad decisions." One of the bikers tried to flee but was immediately intercepted by the agents. The rest stood frozen as John continued. "You've been recorded committing multiple crimes, including vandalism and arson, and since you were kind enough to leave your fingerprints everywhere, the case practically solves itself." The gang stared in stunned silence as the agents began reading them their rights. Daryl, still defiant, spat. "This isn't over, old man," John smirked. "Oh, it's over. For you, at least. I've got a porch to rebuild." As the bikers were loaded into the SUVs, one of the agents leaned toward John. "Nice work, sir. Clean operation." John nodded, watching as the convoy drove off. He glanced back at the charred remains of his porch and said with a wry grin, "Guess I'll need sturdier wood this time." The neighbors, emboldened by the sight of justice being served, began gathering outside. Some cheered, others clapped, and Mrs. Whitaker even brought over a pie. "Well done, John," she said, handing him the dish. "Thanks, Carol," John replied, holding up the pie. "Nothing like homemade dessert to celebrate a little neighborhood cleanup." The next day, the local news channels were abuzz with an electrifying story. Headlines proclaimed, "Infamous biker gang brought down in daring operation led by local hero." Footage from John's security cameras played on a loop, showing the gang vandalizing his home and setting his porch ablaze. The public watched in shock as the calm, unassuming man faced down the aggressors. Social media erupted with praise, Comments poured in, "This guy deserves a medal," and "I'd want him as my neighbor any day." Some even joked about nominating John for office, dubbing him the King of Suburban Justice. By afternoon, the quiet street outside John's home transformed into a bustling hub of support. Neighbors gathered, some bringing casseroles and baked goods, while others just came to shake his hand. Tom, the usually reserved man from across the street, stepped forward hesitantly. "John," Tom began, his voice a little shaky, "we always thought you were just, the guy with the neat lawn and the flag. Turns out you're kind of a legend." John smiled, adjusting the newly installed flagpole. "Legend? Let's not get carried away, Tom. I just did what anyone would do. Protect their home and stand their ground," Mrs. Whitaker chimed in, holding a tray of cookies. "Don't be modest, John. You stared down a gang and didn't even flinch. That's not exactly ordinary." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, making John laugh. He raised a hand, his voice steady but humble. "I appreciate it, really. But the real heroes, they're the ones who show up every day to protect us, like the firefighters and police who helped me out here. Let's give them a round of applause." Meanwhile, justice was being served. Daryl and his closest allies faced jail time for arson, vandalism, and harassment. The remaining gang members, convicted of lesser offenses, were ordered to perform community service. In a twist that delighted the neighbors, the judge assigned them to restore John's property. For weeks, the bikers could be seen repainting John's house, repairing his porch, and replanting his garden under strict supervision. Daryl, drenched in sweat, muttered bitterly as he hammered a new plank into place. "This is ridiculous," he grumbled. From his newly rebuilt porch, John sipped a cold lemonade. "You missed a spot there, Daryl. Careful. You want to make sure it's up to code." The neighbors burst into laughter, and Daryl's face turned crimson as he silently returned to his work. That evening, the street returned to its usual calm. John stood on his porch, admiring the garden that had been restored to its former glory. The flag he'd replaced fluttered gently in the breeze, a quiet symbol of resilience. Neighbors gathered one last time, applauding as John raised his glass of iced tea. "To a peaceful neighborhood, and to learning how not to burn dinner on the grill," he said, grinning. Laughter rippled through the group as people began to head home. Tom lingered, giving John a thumbs up. "You're an inspiration, John. Let me know if you need help with the grill. I'm serious." "I'll hold you to that," John replied with a wink. As the sun dipped below the horizon, John leaned against the freshly painted porch railing, taking in the quiet. He sipped his tea, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. With a glance at the repaired flagpole, he muttered, "Now, where's that barbecue sauce?"